All right, let's go ahead and begin. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Adams. I'm the founder and president of Balancing Act. It's a pleasure to have everyone here for this second of a two-part series called the Makers Workshop. We do these 2 or 3 times a year, and I have to say it's one of my favorite opportunities that we have to reach out to local government professionals that are thinking through this whole idea of how best to communicate with residents about budget and financial issues, and how to do that in a dynamic and engaging way that frames the right kind of conversation, lets them find the right points of interaction that are useful for the public and appropriate for the public to provide input on, and also for you to get useful input that you need in order to make a high performance budget that's responsive to resident needs and is understandable and aligns with strategic plans and works for elected officials as well. So we're very excited to have everyone. I'm going to introduce people in just a moment. Let me begin to share my screen though. And I'm going to go to the next slide and give the overview of today. So as I said, this is the second of a 2-part series. If you have not watched the first one, you're no problem. We should be making the recording available to you in a number of different ways. And if you can't find it, let us know. We're going to focus today on looking at some examples of different ways that the simulation has been used. We tried to create a tool that's flexible, that can meet various needs. And we're going to show you some of what we think are very creative and innovative needs that might be inspiring to some of you. And then we're going to spend probably the bulk of today in a conversation and learning from Zach Wolfe. He is our budget advisor. He works with us on a number of implementations. He is a former public administrator, and we'll introduce him in just a moment. But the purpose of that is really to not just focus on the technology, this new form of public engagement that a simulation is, but to really think about how do you get value out of it. And he sat in your seats quite a while, in many times for many different years, and has some, I think, critical insights about how to do that and how to have it not become too unwieldy of a task. And then I want to end by promoting and letting everybody know about this exciting new work that GFOA is doing as part of its Rethinking Budgeting initiative. Next week, they have a summit that is devoted to rethinking budgeting, and we're really excited about that, and we're actually participating in that. So the folks that you have on the call, we're going to introduce Zach separately, but you've got myself and Amy Kavanagh, who's our Director of Sales, and Garrett Hernandez-Reimer, who's our Director of Customer Success. If you do have questions or comments, we think that we've got the chat and the Q&A working. So go ahead and put them in there, and probably Amy will be the person that will read those. And so we'd love to have this be as interactive as possible. I know that this format is in some ways not completely interactive, and we also know that some people just like to eat a sandwich and watch the webinar during lunch. So either one of those is fine, but we really do want to be responsive to any questions or concerns that you have. So please let us know if you have any. And I also just like to say it's wonderful. This list has grown. These are the people, the public entities that have signed up to be a part of this webinar, and we're really glad to have everybody. It's grown by about 6 or 8 since last week, which is just terrific. And now I want to go to our first agenda item, which is some use cases. So I'm going to pull over my window here, and I've got some things loaded up. And so I'm going to show you 2 or 3 different use cases, and then Zach is, or I'm going to show you like our general use case. Then Garrett is going to show you a couple of other things, and then I'm going to come back and show you some of our kind of more specific types of uses. So this is just our demo. So this is not a real place, but what we found is that our clients often change things, which is great to be able to have a software tool that's nimble and can be changed as you wish. But I found that sometimes when we use an actual city for this general introduction, that things have moved. I didn't know that. So this is not an actual city, but it's really meant to demonstrate some features. So the first screen that you'll see on Balancing Act is the intro screen. And that's a great place to indicate why you're doing budget engagement, what your purpose is, what your goals are this year, if you have any high-level issues that you want to convey. If you're, for example, expecting to have a decrease in revenue and you're looking at tightening your belts, that's the type of thing that you can put here. This next screen gives you a chance to convey a little bit more information if you want, but you can also ask some questions. So we've got an editor that allows you to put in, to ask certain questions. You can have people free text questions in if you want. This next one I think is really innovative and somewhat unique in terms of public engagement. Often it's very useful to know where somebody lives, but people generally don't like to say where they live on an online tool. So if you can get people to give you their zip code, which they'll generally do, or postal code. We have some Canadian clients on as well, and this works in Canada as well in the US. If they'll give you the postal code, we have configured this so it pulls up a map that's centered around that postal code. And then we ask people, would you mind just dropping a pin? You don't have to tell us exactly where you live, but drop a pin kind of close to where you live. And then on the back end, we can give you a map that shows where everybody dropped their pin. And then on the detailed results, we also give you a CSV that has longitude and latitude. And for entities that have a GIS function, it's a pretty cool way to sort of see how people who live in various places are responding and what their budget priorities are. So this is the general simulation. And last week, we talked about what we view as being the three most important requirements for a high quality budget engagement tool using a simulation, and the 3 C's. So it's constraints, context, and consequences. So we use this top bar here as a way to convey the most important constraint, which is that you can't spend more money than you have. So the task that you're asking your residents to do with you is to provide input on budget priorities and even on the revenue side in most cases, but to have it essentially add up. And so this is dynamic and it changes with choices you make below, and you'll see that in just a moment. Over here, we've got a pie chart a donut chart that shows spending items, which show up over here on the right. And then down here, you've got revenue. And we have maybe I'd say about 15 or 20% of our clients put revenue items on, but they don't let people interact with them. It's completely up to you. It's your choice. Let me go over here to the spending side now. This is where people typically start. And you've got an item like the police department. So you can click on the info icon, and with the first click, it gives you just a high-level explanation of what this is. So responsible for enforcing laws and public safety. And then you've got this optional ability to provide more details. And you can really put anything you want in here. In this case, we have a dashboard from the city of Scottsdale, Arizona, that tells what average response time has been for police patrol. And so there's a little bit of text up here that talks about what's gone on with the budget lately, that it's gone up 0.7% annually. And then they've got this live updating table that's just really cool. If you don't have software that does this, whether it's this actually comes from a company called Invisio. Questica has one called OpenBook, and then you can also use Power BI or Tableau. These can be dropped right in here, but you can also drop anything you want in here. You can drop in a video, you can put in a link, or you can leave it blank. It's really up to you in terms of whatever context. That's the second T that you want to convey. And then we have some different ways to interact with the items. And so you've got police operations here, and that one just has a very a minimal explanation of what that is. And it uses our most simple way of interacting with the tool. So if somebody wants to decrease that, by default, it would each click would give you a decrease of 1%, and it shows you what that looks like over here. If they wanted to increase it, it would also increase by 1%, and then it would show you what that total is here, and then it would reflect that up on the balance bar. So the constraint being that you're now in deficit, and so you'll need to have some offsets in spending, or be willing to raise taxes in order to have that increased police operations function. We have another type of question called scenario questions. And this is when you've got some defined options that you really want people to think about. Often there's a service level attached, which also has a corresponding budget item. So this question actually came from one of our clients, a medium-sized city in Florida, and they were asking about role of civilians. And so the question that they had was, should civilians be used to take most police reports instead of sworn officers? And so if you click on this, it gives a brief explanation of this. And it says that, there's some policing research that says this could be done without harming the quality of policing. And then if you click on more details, I think it just has a link. So it's got a link to a study. If somebody really wants to kind of dig in deep on this, they can do that. And once they're satisfied that they have enough information, they can say, you know what, I think it's really valuable to be able to talk to a police officer in those instances where I need to, and I want to keep things the same. So that would be the status quo. So that would be no difference from the proposed budget. Or they could go down here and they could say, you know what, I think I'm okay with that. What does that do to the budget? And if they click on that, you can see it's actually a $90,000 savings. It shows that savings here. And now we've actually just offset those increases that we made up above. So it's very dynamic. It shows trade-offs. People can really help indicate what they want the most. We have another type of tool down here, another type of question where you can select multiple. So say that you've got some small capital projects that might be in the budget, and you can ask people which ones they should select. And so in this instance, you can select as many as you want. So you could look at curb cuts, and somebody would say, well, what's a curb cut? And you can say this allows people who need to roll over curbs and to sidewalks. It allows them accessibility. And there's a picture just so that you can eliminate any doubt on that. You could do bus shelters, and that one doesn't need any more further explanation. And you can say, okay, of those two things, I think I would like the curb cuts. I don't want the streetlight replacement program, but I do think I want those bus shelters. So you've actually just made yourself a little bit of a hole here that you'll need to continue to address. Let me go over to the revenue side now. You can use as many categories as you want. We encourage you not to use too many because you want it to be comprehensible and understandable to residents. But you can open it up and have different types of taxes. And so in this case, we start out with sales tax, and you'll notice this is a little bit different because it's adjusting by a rate. And so we've got this set to go up or down based on a 1/4% increment. And so if you decreased it by 1 click, you would decrease it by 1/4%. It would show you what that reduction in revenue would be. And then you've created an even worse hole for yourself. This one, our company is based in Colorado. This one is configured to Colorado law. So local governments don't have the ability on their own through their elected officials to be able to raise taxes. So this one lets you know that if somebody wants to raise taxes, you have to get a vote of the people. And so in this case, we have added a soft floor so that somebody can increase that if that's what their preference would be. We don't prevent them from doing that. You do have the option of preventing them if you want, but they just have to know that public officials don't have that authority on their own. It would have to go to the people. And so I'm just going to give it one more click and to put us back into surplus. Property tax, just for the sake of illustration, we have this one adjusting by a lump sum as opposed by a rate. We have another function over here that we call dedicated funds, which allows you to identify certain funds, to attach certain funds to certain spending items. It can be used either to get a sentiment if somebody would like to continue paying or would like to add a new tax to pay for something specifically. It can be used for an existing type of expenditure, or perhaps you have a special sales tax that would, it can only be used for roads, for example. You can use the dedicated funds for that one. In this case, it's asking if residents would be interested in having this additional sales tax to pay for roads improvements. And so it asks the question, should sales tax be increased to fund transportation projects? No is the default, but if you say yes, what happens? It opens up a window, and what this window does is it connects the revenue side and the spending side. Let me start over here with no. And so if you say no, it means the sales tax stays at 2%, and it means you have no money for new transportation projects. And then the consequence, that third C, it says that you should expect for traffic delays to continue. And I just went ahead and put in a pothole that has not been fixed. Now, the alternative would be that you'd like to increase taxes. And if you do that, it would mean that you pay a little bit more. You would have some funds that could be used for that purpose. And I just went to YouTube and I got a picture, or at least a video of some workers who are repairing the roads. So just a nice way of illustrating what that tax money would get. So that is our general budget simulation. This is the most common use that we have, and it can be scaled up for a very, very large city like San Jose or Phoenix, or it can be scaled down to a small city like Healdsburg, California, for example, or we actually even have much smaller cities than Healdsburg. But it can really be, kind of customized to suit your needs in this. So I've got a couple more I'm going to show you in a moment, but I also want to let Garrett show you 2 applications of our prioritized tool. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Garrett.
Perfect. Let me share my screen here. So yeah, just within the last week or so, we've seen 2 clients kind of leverage new use cases for Prioritize. So here, this is the city of Denver using the Prioritize tool for their first participatory budgeting program. And what they've done is they've actually launched 4 Prioritizes in different versions all at once, 1 for a citywide version and 3 more neighborhood centric versions. And they're going to use paper ballots for this as well, but it was really important for them to leverage technology and balancing act in general, just to better reach those more diverse communities, such as youth, unhoused residents, and even undocumented residents as well. And the city council, they actually did have some fears with just only using paper ballots and mail-in ballots, because they had a hunch that might result in some resistance from those diverse communities that they wanted to reach out to. So here, the cool thing about Balancing Act is, as I click continue here on those entry screens, is you're able to ask some questions that help you better paint a picture of the user, whether it's demographic questions or what neighborhood do you live in, without having to ask more personal identifying information. So here, for their participatory budgeting, you can see they're using the tile function, but they're also showing the more info of all the items that they're proposing for the participatory budgeting program. So here I can go ahead and click select as a Denver resident on safe outdoor spaces. You can see the thermometer is changing from red. As I scroll down, I'll add to cleaner parks. It's going to go to orange because I'm getting closer and closer to my $1 million goal that I can actually exceed here. Now I'll scroll down. Maybe I want wider and more accessible sidewalks for people. Click select. I'm almost there, so I'll add some outdoor fitness equipment, and there it is. So I'm greeted with a nice little message that says, thank you, you've completed it, but don't forget to rank and show your top priorities. And I think you've noticed the fun confetti in the background. And as I scroll down, that's where I can rank order my choices at the end of the day. So that is one new use case for Prioritize that we've seen, like I just mentioned, just within the last week or so, participatory budgeting. The other use case that we've seen is related to strategic and planning goals. So here, this is the city of Pittsburgh. And the first thing that you might notice is that there aren't any dollar amounts tied to these items and projects. So here, Prioritize can be really flexible for your use cases. They're not using any units, but what they are using is the categories feature. So here, they're actually grabbing their priorities like safer neighborhoods, welcoming communities, and thriving people. And what they're doing is allowing residents to then select items or projects that pertain to those strategic goals as well. And so I can select here, select, and again, you're still able to rank order and even go back and learn more about these types of items that are pertaining to the strategic goals, just like the simulation tool here. So like I mentioned, both of these use cases have actually been launched just within the last week or so, and the submissions have been pretty strong for both, which is exciting. I definitely think the Prioritize is pretty user-friendly and accessible, going back to that idea of why the city of Denver is using it to kind of leverage technology to reach those more diverse communities. But yeah, I think I just also wanted to highlight the flexibility and different use cases you could use with the Prioritize tool to maybe brainstorm from your point of view of some other use cases, how you can use this tool.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Garrett. So we are often contacted, there's some confusion just in language, the difference between citizen engagement on the budget, which is more similar to what I showed you earlier, where you're looking at the general fund and you're looking at taxes. And that's, maybe it's a requirement of almost every government. I've never seen a government that didn't have some requirement for it. Sometimes it's it's as minimal as a hearing. But it's also really what GFOA is starting to encourage more and more for entities to do, and especially for those of you that are thinking about applying for the Distinguished Budget Award, that's become a requirement to begin to do some type of more meaningful public engagement activities. But we're really delighted to work with the City of Denver to have our newer tool prioritize use for participatory budgeting. The other thing I want to highlight is with City of Pittsburgh, another initiative, and for those of you who read the Government Finance Review, the cover story, I think over the summer, I think it might have been the June issue, was all about pulling together, bridging that gap between planning and budgeting. This idea, it seems kind of obvious, but in the actual function and operation of government, sometimes it's a challenge, is to have the budget follow the plan and to follow planning. And so that's one thing we're actually working with a collection of other tech companies to help provide an integrated solution to help bridge it, to help bridge budgeting and planning and citizen engagement. We're actually very excited about that, and we'll be announcing something in not too long from now that might help some of you if you want to sort of combine those three elements of budgeting, planning, and citizen engagement. All right, let me show you a couple more use cases from my screen. This one is, I think, very exciting. This is exciting I should probably be careful about how I use that. It's exciting because it really helps with a tough problem. And so let me give you a little bit of background on this. So this is City of Tacoma in 2020. And it was the summer of 2020. And for those of you who remember that not too distant past, it was a tough time for two reasons. It was tough because it was the summer of COVID. So the first summer that we had with COVID, and entities that were sales tax dependent especially were looking at really just the bottom falling out of their finances. And it was a very tough time. And the interesting thing about it was those entities, how they chose to deal with it. Whether or not they chose to actually share with residents that there was a projected resident shortfall, or just to make a lot of cuts. And what I love about City of Tacoma is that they decided to share with people that they were looking at for very understandable reasons, looking at a very difficult situation. And then they invited residents to do this, and they had an enormous outpouring of resident interest. I believe they had well over 5,000 people that came to the site and actually provided input on how to do this. And for those of you who attend ICMA, there was actually a presentation by Professor Zach Moore of the Kansas University that was at the GF or at ICMA, where he talked about what happens when an entity used a simulation to present a budget deficit. And I think public officials have good reason to wonder, is that a terrible thing because people are going to think that we can't budget? What he found is that it actually invites people to help solve the problem. And so there's actually no loss in trust. They measure trust levels. There's no loss in trust. There's really no negative to it, other than the fact that you get this ability to have this conversation about some tough choices. Nobody has a perfect crystal ball, but there's two major things that are on the horizon that could require some tough choices. One, that ARPA funds will be expiring in the next year or two. And even though I know governments try not to have that filter into operations, sometimes it's hard to keep that completely separate. And so you might need to let people know that if they're going to continue with the services they got used to, that at least benefited in part by ARPA funds, that this could be a way to have a conversation about what to continue, what not to continue, or if they want to backfill that with some increase in revenue. And then the other one, which is probably occupying a little bit more people's attention, is thinking about the likelihood of a recession. Most economists now think that we will be moving into recession in the next year or so. And how do you have that conversation with residents about what to do during a recession? And there's a study that was done by using ICMA data by Benedict Jimenez that was published about 2015 or so, that looked at cities and counties that were able to respond in the most healthy way possible from the Great Recession of 2009, 2010, 2011. And what that study found was that those entities that invested proactively in having a two-way conversation, invested in public engagement, they had more options available that allowed them to go through the recession in a better way. And so that just reinforces a lot of what GFOA is recommending with its rethinking budgeting and recommendations in other places, that public engagement be institutionalized and not just thought of as something that you do if you've got a terrible year like 2020 was for sales tax dependent entities, or if you had a once in a lifetime opportunity that you might have had this last year with ARPA funds, but really just to create that opportunity, because you don't know what's coming down the pike. If you would have looked at 2019, none of this would have been predictable. And so the idea here is to have this two-way conduit for fact-based conversation. So let me just show you quickly what City of Tacoma did, and where they had so many people responding. So they used these intro tools, and I'm going to just click out of that. But as you can see, they started out with a pretty significant budget. And so then they presented a lot of items, and they were really focusing on affordable housing, and they wanted to find out, what people might be willing to pay for there to increase some of those items, but they didn't let people do it without going over to the revenue side and saying how they would pay for that. So I thought that was a very innovative use. They also obviously spent a lot of money on community safety. This was a hard year also. 2020 was hard, not just because of COVID, but this was also about the same time as the murder of George Floyd. And so there was a lot of concerns about racial equity. And so once again, just a way to try to structure a conversation about what to do about community safety and other things. I want to show you St. Paul, Minnesota. This is a little bit of a staff favorite. It's been really cool. They kind of took our tool and really modified it and had a different type of use that we think is really cool. And so what they did is, instead of filling up their spending side with essentially representation of what a simplified representation of what the proposed budget is, they instead put a bunch of decision items on it. So they've got things like housing options. Should we invest in more homes for low income and unsheltered populations? Should we increase options and activity at the rec centers? Should we increase hours at rec centers, and so forth? And they let people indicate which of those they wanted, but they were really just looking at which to include. And if people did want to include them, would they be willing to pay more about it? So if you take just a step back, they start out every year. I should just restart this. They introduce it with a nice video from their mayor, who talks about what's at stake and what the big issues are in the coming budget. And then they say we're starting out in deficit by $3 million. The deficit starts out $3 million in debt. This is something that is typical for them. They have a structural deficit of $3 million. So they're starting out in the red, and then they're asking, what else would you like to do? And so the other thing that they did was they used our impact feature to give residents additional information that I think was really useful. So if you go down here and you select a few of these, and you look at some of these types of things and say that, yes, I do want to do these things, you've given yourself a deficit. And then over here, they're primarily property tax dependent, or that's at least what they have the most control over. They're asking people to indicate how they would pay for it. And so if you click this once, it raises $1.5 million. I think it's 1%. So it's increasing the revenue. This isn't the rate, but it increases the revenue by $1.5 million. And then it shows you up here that means 1% more revenue is being raised from property taxes. And then they've gone over here and they've said, okay, and that's going to mean $7 for the median home value. So you've still got $3 million to go. So if you're willing to click it a little bit more, it raises an additional $4.5 million for in property tax. And the cost of the things that people said they wanted is going to be $21. I thought that was really interesting from a lot of ways. It's a way of presenting the decision items in a simpler, more straightforward way. And it's also asking that classic question of governance, which is, what are people willing to pay for with their tax dollars, by having them indicate directly what type of tax they'd be willing to pay. I didn't look at the sales tax, but then showing them what it would look. And I think in most people would agree that that's not too painful. I also want to show you a new and innovative version of the simulation from Riverside, California. So Riverside, California, we were contacted by their public works department, and they had a particular problem. They have parking there as an enterprise, so it's got its own unique funding sources. And they wanted to use Balancing Act as a way to get input on how they should raise enough revenue in order to pay for the cost of their parking enterprise. And so they use something called our guided tour feature. And so I'm going to show you what the end looks like. So the end looks like a regular simulation, and it's got capital projects and security and police officer foot patrols and things that are probably fairly recognizable to you. But they really wanted to spotlight that these things need to be paid for. And so they started out by identifying 9 revenue items that they want people to review and provide input on before they even get to the spending side. And so I've just raised a little bit of revenue here by sort of agreeing to different parking meter hours over here. And there's another question about the parking meters. I think this one has to do with rates and so forth. And each of these has a description of what it is. And as you can see, we're starting to whittle down that deficit. And by the time they get to the end, you can see there's actually 9 of these questions. They would be at this point. And you can put spending items on that guided tour as well as revenue items. And I think that's all I wanted to show you. So I'm now going to go back to my PowerPoint, and I'm going to introduce to you Zach Wolfe. Zach contacted us in 2015. We had just launched our product, and there was an article in GovTech magazine, and Zach called us up and talked about how enthusiastic he was about this and glad to see something like this. And at the time, he worked for Maricopa County in the Phoenix area, and he then went on to become budget director at the city of Marion, Iowa. And now he is helping us to really, help our customers to get value out of the simulation-based approach to budget engagement and public engagement generally. And he's really, I think, upped the game of our staff in terms of realizing the potential value that local governments can have. And for those local governments that he's been able to help, I think they've seen a great deal of value too. So Zach, did you want to share your screen, or do you want to just talk while I project this?
Chris, if you don't mind driving, I'll do the talk. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to meet you all. Just wanted to reiterate, if you do have any questions while we're going through these slides or any observations, feel free to use the chat function. It's really helpful to gain the localized perspective on each of these endeavors. As Chris mentioned, I'm a practitioner in the field, and so I'm really excited to hear kind of the individualized use cases that we're finding through budget engagement. So what we've been doing is we're working with staff on looking how to move through budget engagement with cities that many times it's their first time entering into this arena or really taking it into the a simulation model. Is what does the process look like? And we believe we've been rather successful in, I guess the first piece of it is really the initial meeting step, planning step 1. I mean, everyone knows there's been a resurgence recently in government for strategic planning. It's really helped set the bedrock, especially as many of our cities do practice incremental budgeting, where our previous year's budget becomes the starting place for next year's budget. The strategic planning process helps guide some of those decisions when we need to make tough decisions. And there are trade-offs in the community that we're looking in order to say move into or address an emerging need. It may require us looking at resources differently. So in that piece, the planning piece, we believe is essential in order to getting off on the right foot, moving it forward. The idea of vision to action on what you're going to be doing in the latter stages. Chris mentioned also that Balance and Act is extremely nimble, and that's one of the reasons personally why I was really excited about Balance and Act for Maricopa County when I was looking at public engagement tools across the spectrum. I was actually interested at that time of any tool that would help move forward the conversation, and I felt Balance and Act was the most nimble of the group and moving it forward. And really, because it does open up for those questions, you can ask questions or you can set it up in as simple in a format as you'd like. And simplicity mean that you can get it so it's understandable to your end user, and you can get it up and running rather quickly. It also allows for multi-layered approaches, and the multi-layered approach I find is something that cities who go through the planning process start thinking through. How have we traditionally done budget engagement, and might we want to have a hybrid approach where we don't just or in addition to doing a simulation, we might want to keep the meeting structure. We find meeting structure allows for a different conversation than the one-way conversation of the resident to the city through the simulation. So there's ways to put that into place, and the planning process really sifts through those questions and the goals and where the city's looking to take it in order to move to the next step, which is the build process. Build is I would say an expected next step after you're planning, you're looking to build something or iterate it to move it forward. And I think people know that through balancing acts, the simulators was the first tool, but balancing acts has really opened up with prioritize and moving through now taxpayer receipt and looking at even the guided tour. There's different ways of presenting choices. And so that build process I look is looking at what you want to plan, how you want to build into it, but also asking a question on the budget side on where are you at in your budget process. Quickly, I just want to tell the story of 2 dinner parties. If you go to a dinner party at my mom's house, you'll likely receive an invitation, a time to the party. You'll receive, once you get there, you'll be told where you're going to sit because you'll probably have a name tag right in front of your chair. In contrast, my mother-in-law, as long as you arrive on the same day, it's okay. You can invite really as many people as you would like. And there's always a seat at the table for you. Why I was thinking about that in the budget side is doing budget engagement gets us to question how are we inviting people to the table for those discussions and at what point. So I feel that's a really important context to think about, not just on the simulation side, but also on the budgeting process side of how are the two integrated well, so you're going to have a successful engagement. Which moves us in the next step, 3, engage, actually working with the residents, as well as other core groups. You might look at specific stakeholder groups. So the engagement process will flow through based on your planning. And then step number 4, communication. Everyone mentions communications, important to maintain any relationships. And that's really what part of the engagement process is cultivating. It's going beyond looking at the technical side of doing budgeting and really moving to the people side. How do we listen, sift through, and get succinct perceptions and look through opportunities for addressing complex issues? And the communication side I look is communicating not just internally or not just externally with the on the results that you find after doing the engagement with the public, which is an important piece to make sure you close the loop of what you did there, but also with city council. Think through, it's a good opportunity to think through how are we going to relay those results or the responses back to city council and letting them know some of the limitations maybe this year of moving those forward and how this may be a precursor to further information that we need in order to make some changes in a subsequent year. Because I believe that's one of the other areas on the communication side and talking to cities. There's sometimes a concern that if the public indicate a certain area they're interested in, we may need to move into that immediately. And I would say that actually understanding the root of that is more important, so that you can address the solution in a similar fashion. So that communication part is a really important piece of it. And then lastly, evaluation. Which I delved into a little bit on the communicate side, but what are residents saying? You'll have to do it in the communication side, but I look the evaluation side. I would even go one level deeper, because many of the evaluation on what needs to get done really goes back to the department side. So what are those internal conversations that need to be held within the government, not in the public meeting, to say, okay, we're feeling sentiment shifting in certain areas. What would that mean if we were to make changes either to how we deliver services or what resources we are allocating to those to those areas? And that's what I looked at. Evaluation aspect really lends well to engage or bringing public engagement, not just as a process, but as a part of a culture. Seen many organizations, public engagement is part of now the strategic planning value or an organizational value. And I looked at evaluation piece as key in order to closing that up so that you can run through the cycle again in a subsequent year or process.
Yeah, and this is great. I love this slide because it both represents with understandable phases this idea of institutionalizing high quality budget engagement. So right now, what's institutionalized is in most places a budget hearing, maybe a survey, and given the nature of the budget, those usually won't get you everything that you need if you really want to have that information about how people would resolve trade-offs, as well as the education. So I really like this slide, and it also makes it seem a little bit more manageable. And so that's another thing that Zach, a perspective that he's brought, is that even though these 5 steps may seem intimidating, in my view, it's actually the opposite of that, because they're phases. You don't have to do them all at once. And one thing that I think Zach has done a really nice job with in helping our newer clients is to say, this is going to be your first year. And if you're like every other government, it's going to vastly increase the quality of budget engagement. But really, with a lot of things with government is, you should be thinking more like, 3 to 5 years. And this actually, sort of lays an annual framework to be increasing the quality and increasing the effectiveness, increasing the value each time. So I really love this slide. However, there are two of these that are sort of particularly important that Zach has been really instrumental in helping local governments. And if you can get these two right, I think that you're really set up to get the next three, to engage, communicate, and evaluate right. And that's the plan and the build. And so we actually have a service that we're increasingly offering that Zach is leading for us. We call it the concierge service. We're not sure about the name exactly, but the idea here is that if you're feeling like this is intimidating to make this step, that we can actually give you a process and help to get you over that initial challenge. We know that so many local governments are staff challenged right now, and what Zach can do is he can really just help you, identify where it is you want to go, and then to help you get there in relatively short order. There's some amazing conversations that he's been engendering with some of our clients. So this is the first two of that step, the plan and the build. And I've asked Zach if he would just share a little bit more about that, especially the plan, because if you can get the plan part right, the rest of it will flow.
Well, thank you, Chris. The first bullet point on the planning side is really what are the goals for budget engagement, and working in the budgeting world. I mean, that's really where we start from at the beginning of the year. What are the goals for that budget cycle? Either city council as well as staff. And we find that similarly in the plan side, it's really important to set those goals, because those goals are also going to frame the type of questions that you'll be asking through the process. It really moves more easily into build. And as Chris mentioned beforehand, many times the goal itself is a goal that will require multiple years, similar to a strategic plan. Most strategic plans are, the work plan may be 1 year, but the strategic plan will often be 3 to 5 years out. So similarly, vetting those allow a city to assign appropriate expectations for that first year. And that's one of the other things, just to mention briefly. Expectations really, my opinion, have really helped put at ease new adopters or individuals that may not have been as closely exposed or part of the public engagement process. Many times I'll be talking to a finance manager who will say, Zach, you know what, this initiative is led by the city manager. Now it's moved over to my end, and I'm not really sure how to move this forward or what the benefit is. And as we talk through where the city's at that point, or city, county, or school district is at that point in time, and what do they believe is actionable that first year, and what are we moving for in the second and third year, we find that all of a sudden the weight is dropped, because it's not the expectation that you're going to have to do this full-fledged public engagement initiative in year one, but more so how do you get awareness of the tool and start taking those first couple steps towards engagement. Similarly, setting expectations is very important on the stakeholder side. Two of the main stakeholders you'll have in any of the engagements will be your city council as well as the residents. So making sure that you know the expectations for both of those groups, and specifically with the residents, what questions are you going to place before them? That's one of the key recommendations in public engagement. You don't want to ask a resident a question that you on information that you may not be willing to utilize later. So really getting down to who are those stakeholders and what you need to know for them, which goes into the next area, the key issues. The key issues are extremely important on the planning side, because we find too, if it's your first time entry into public engagement, what do you ask? It can be as high level as here's your department, but here's your entire department budget. And it can be broken down in many different ways, either by department, you can go into division level. But what are you asking people to comment on? Those key issues many times will help you focus and frame how we want to move ahead those issues that year, and what might be the year one key areas that you need input on, given that part of the budget process that you'll be asking them information about. The linking communication and engagement strategy is also really key. As you know, there's many different engagement mediums that you're currently utilizing in your city to get people to get involved and even to speak about the budget. Almost as Chris mentioned, every city, whether through Facebook, Twitter, public hearings, or even having your office doors open, is an opportunity for hearing from public. So how do you want to have a constructive strategy that doesn't overreach into other areas of engagement that may be going on in your city, and is an authentic one given where your city's at the time? And then lastly, what data and information to include. This builds up on the other area previously. I feel is one of the key questions that we're looking for on the build side, but in my opinion, it can't be answered sufficiently without going through the other steps beforehand of really unpacking the goals, the purpose for the engagement, where you think you can move into in the first year, what's needed, and then afterwards, the information and data will flow from that. And one of the areas I just like to mention in this area is depending on the type of questions you'll ask will determine the type of answers you get. It makes sense. It's one of the questions to unpack. If you have a question at the department level, you'll find department level responses versus if you ask a very specific question on what would happen next year if you were to increase property taxes, or if you were to add park amenities, you're going to get answers more specific. So that really gets into the plan side. Plan is essential in having a, I look at cohesive engagement where staff know their roles and responsibilities and then can move us into the next step, which is build. Chris and Garrett did a great job talking about how Balancing Act is constructed and the organization, the roll-up items. So Balancing Act is extremely nimble to be able to move through different case scenarios you want to move through. It's just a well-designed tool. The loading the data similarly, data can be loaded through the import-export feature. It's actually my favorite way because you can get a lot of data really quickly once you know how it's structured, and individuals in finance and budget, that's it's a lot less complex than we deal with on a regular basis. This next area of added context constraints and special interactions. Once again, St. Paul, to me, masterful. They did an amazing job of putting forward not just the questions that they were interested in, but contextualizing it. And that's the other area I'd mentioned, though we're under build, I think is an important piece to think about is the idea of how do we communicate with our, in the building process, how do we communicate the multiple decisions before a city and the opportunities presented there. And I was challenged recently by a professor at Iowa State University. He was telling me when he was teaching budget, he goes, Zach, I really like sharing with them that budget is more about, it's more about words than it is about numbers. And I let it sit there for a minute, and I thought, wow, I build a book sometimes that this thick, over 80%, probably 95% actually, are probably filled with numbers. How well am I contextualizing what's in here to the resident? Equally, the same question I'd ask for city council. And that's where I'd say this isn't the session for going into it, but Balancing Act can be used in many ways to also get you to think about how do you present choices in front of city council. It's one of the things that I was looking to in Marion of how do we use Balancing Act in different ways to once again contextualize and understand the data and the decisions before individuals and have meaningful conversations in ways that gets people to find solutions and build bridges rather than individualized opinions. Lastly, the entry-exit screens, often a forgotten piece of it, but that's your first door to when someone's going in and seeing your simulation. St. Paul did a great job of getting their mayor at the forefront of that and really eloquently gave an overview of what's before St. Paul and why their participation is needed and is part of the culture of St. Paul. Similarly, on the exit side, making sure the appropriate information is there after leaving the survey and demographic questions. So those are just two layers of the plan build process.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I do want to invite anybody to ask questions. As I said, this is Zach's participation and help, especially with our new clients, but even with existing clients, is I think just adding tremendous value. So you've got an excellent software tool. You've got a need of residents to understand where government dollars are being allocated and the revenue structure. And now Zach has developed this framework for us to really get value out of that. So please ask questions if you have any. I wanted to, the last part of those phases is evaluate. And we did this really cool project this year with the city of Austin. And Zach was sort of our expert on this. Zach, do you want to just explain a little bit about what you did for the city of Austin? This was unique, but I'm absolutely certain that this won't be the last time that we create this expanded dashboard.
Yeah. The city of Austin, they were moving forward with Balancing Act, and one of the areas in discussing through their goals for the project, they said, you know, one of the areas that is key to the success of this initiative is to ensure that we have communication points with our leadership, our internal leadership, as well as with the public. And the two different reasons. One, Austin, many people know the city of Austin. They're a city that prides themselves on high levels of transparency and access to government. So they said, if we're going to go through this process, we want to make sure the information that we collect is also accessible to the multiple stakeholder groups and residents who are interested on what were the findings of the survey. Equally as important, but in a different way, is the internal leadership. And I really commend them for doing this. They didn't look that the survey itself was just going to be something in the budget and finance office, but actually this was a broader conversation that they were going to take out to the various levels of leadership. And, you know, the city of Austin's a large city, so you have multiple individuals part of this. And what this allowed for then, as Chris is going through and showing, is it level set the information. So it took it outside of just sitting with the architect of this in the finance or budget office, and it provided that in the hands of those interested stakeholders to say, okay, what happened overall? And as Chris can show on the first page, one of the things, looking at the first graph on the left-hand side, thanks, Chris, an average change by department division, I guess to level set a little bit more, is their simulation was set up by department and division. So you could go in there and increase or decrease the departmental budgets or the divisional budgets, as well as there was a your idea area. So the average change by department division, you can quickly see, of the green being plus and the red being negative, is the police department stands out. So on average, the average individual that responded to this change or reduced the police budget by, I believe it's, if I'm looking at it correctly, $66 million. That is a significant finding, and it's also, you can look at it by the division. We broke down the information division lower down of which divisions made that up. You scroll down a little bit, Chris, and you can see the number of changes by division, and then which areas did they actually change. So you're seeing the majority of the change of the individual's changes was in the neighborhood-based policing area. Once again, without being in the city of Austin, I'm not sure what secondary factors are leading to questions of why is this occurring. But absent a tool like this, it wouldn't allow stakeholders who weren't part of the process, internal process, to start asking some of these questions and then internalizing this, say, even for the police department themselves, to say, here's how the public made changes to your budget. What does this mean to you? And it allows for some of those secondary questions of inquiries. I mentioned to someone recently, we were talking about the evaluation side of the simulations won't necessarily also try to take away some of the fear. People are saying, well, what if people say, for example, reduce the police department or reduce a certain area? And I would mention to them, you know what, it's by their factor reducing, it doesn't necessarily say it should be removed, or it shouldn't be, it doesn't tell you right or wrong, but what it does is it gives you a starting place for another set of questions to understand better where you're at. And I look, the city of Austin did a great job in wanting to understand where those interaction points of the increase and decrease in budget. And we're also able to do, Chris, for example, if you would put in there what Hispanics did overall. So you could select on the color category for Latinos, and you could see their individualized response in comparison to the population overall. So if you were interested in some of the equity issues in many cities are today, of either be inequity by race, socioeconomic status, housing class, or gender, you can utilize a tool like this to parse into that and better understand your data to get to those findings for the communication part of your initiative. And
Jack, actually, that's a great point. I wanted to expand upon that because we have a number of city managers, budget directors, finance directors, even elected officials that would look at something like this and they would be afraid. They would be afraid that, what do I do when somebody wants to cut police this much? And even the city of Austin in 2020, they cut police quite a bit, and they ended up restoring a lot of that in many ways. And I think the answer to that is that this tells you where your residents are. It doesn't tell you what you do as a matter of governing. We have a CFO from a school district. There's actually an article in the last month's Government Financial Review, where after putting a balancing act in the field for a good long time, it's for a school district. Parents came back with, in his view, underappreciating the value of summer school as a way to increase learning, to recover learning loss during COVID. And so he took that as the public official in charge of this, not as a sign that they should cut summer school, but as a sign that they needed to educate residents and parents about the value of that. And so on the one hand, you could say, well, I don't want the information if it's not going to support what I want. But I think that's sort of a dangerous place for government to be, especially with a growing suspicion. And so what this tool does is it tells you what people want, and it doesn't tell you what you should do or what you have to do, but it tells you where the public sentiment is. And for me, it frames a leadership challenge and a communication challenge of this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. Now, Austin, is a larger city than almost any other. They went one step further. They wanted us to create a version of the simulation that could be open to the public. And I think they had about 23,000 users using it, providing input. Some of, not all of them submitted, but then they also had us helped us to work with a scientifically valid research company that came up with a representative sample of Austin residents. And we were very excited about this because what it did was it told us if there was, if the users on the simulation reflected those who were in the random sample. And the really amazing news is that yes, they were directionally, they were almost identical. And so it confirmed that residents, that public officials really did have a conversation to have with residents, particularly about police. And the good news here is that in understanding that there is this lack of interest in some cases in funding police, it tells you that you need to structure a new conversation. And we work with about 40 public administration professors and faculty and researchers around the country, and they're actually going hard to work on that. Is how do you structure a conversation about public safety that might anticipate some of this negativity that you might have, especially in some big cities, but might actually then help you have a real conversation about it. So if somebody's saying, let's decrease funding for police, you can actually say, well, what is it exactly that you want to decrease? Or what do you want to increase instead? And I think it's actually a very robust way of having that conversation. It's something that isn't possible if you're just using surveys alone, or if you're just listening to the loudest voices who come to hearings. By expanding the tool so that anybody can access it online, it really creates new opportunities. And I see that there is a question about Penny. So Penny, I'll answer the question quickly. This tool, this was actually built in Power BI, which is a great tool, and Zach was the one who did that. It's a custom tool. It's not a terribly expensive one to create, but it's one that is really kind of based on individual specifications and then the raw data that comes out of Balancing Act. In Balancing Act, we actually have some really great tools as well. This is what our analytics looks like. This is actually for a school district, and in this instance, people were not that interested in charter schools. We give you a lot of data. We give you 3 different levels of data that are automatically created through the analytics package that's in Balancing Act. But what we just showed you a moment ago is something that's special because Austin really wanted to be able to pull out the demographics and things like that. So if that didn't answer your question, just send me an email or let me know offline. We need to wrap up in just a moment here, Zach. Your presentation has been great. I want to end by just giving a plug for Rethinking Budgeting. So next November 7th, Monday, there is a summit that GFOA is putting on called Rethinking Public Engagement Summit. We have been involved with this rethinking issue, especially on the citizen engagement side, for a couple of years now. We will be making 2 presentations. I'll be the respondent on a presentation on Monday about rights and responsibilities, kind of looking at, just generally how do people participate. And then I'll be doing another presentation, I think it's on Wednesday or Thursday called "Why Budget Engagement Should Be Hard." And spoiler alert, it shouldn't be hard because the modality of engagement is hard. It shouldn't be hard because people have to, go to a meeting. It shouldn't be hard because people can't understand how to use the software. It should be hard because it's so easy to use the software and so easy to provide input that they really wrestle with the hard values decisions and trade-offs that public officials have to make in every public budget. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and just close us out because we've reached time. This is Zach's slide. I think he might have had some eloquent things to say about it. Zach, did you have anything eloquent to say about this slide? I loved it when you put it in.
Nothing more than when I was in your seat, I understood it looked daunting at times, but I looked, it's a journey, not a destination. So your simulation is not the end of the process, but just the beginning. So we're excited about helping you along that journey.
Yep, absolutely. And the place to begin any journey is with the first step. And then I also just want to invite anybody that wants to talk to us to contact us at this phone number or at our info account, or just simply go to our website, and there are ample ways for you to find out how to contact us. So I want to thank Garrett Hernandez-Reimer and Zach so much. Thank you all for your interest in Balancing Act. We'd love to be in touch with you. If you have ideas, questions, challenges, we'd love to engage with you on that. So thank you all, and we hope to talk to you soon.